In the winter of 1982, a town called Times Beach, Missouri, sat under 10 feet of floodwater from the Merrimack River. While residents waited out the flood, the Environmental Protection Agency announced something that made the water the least of their problems. The soil beneath their streets was saturated with dioxin, one of the most toxic compounds ever synthesized. The federal government's recommendation was immediate and permanent. Get out and don't come back. What happened to Times Beach and why is a story about Agent Orange, a waste hauler named Russell Bliss, the Superfund program, and a chemical chain that nobody bothered to trace until it was far too late. Times Beach was founded in 1925 as a summer resort along Route 66, 17 miles southwest of St. Louis. The St. Louis Star-Times newspaper sold 6,000 lots for $67.50 each, bundled with newspaper subscriptions. By the 1970s, it had become a lower middle-class community of around 2,000 people. It had a donut shop, a motel, a few churches, and 23 miles of unpaved dirt roads that threw up clouds of dust every time a car passed through. The town couldn't afford to pave those roads, so in 1972, city officials did what a lot of small towns did. They hired someone to spray them with waste oil. It was cheap. It worked. And the man they hired, Russell Bliss, had done it before. He charged 6 cents a gallon. He had used the same method on horse farms and stables across eastern Missouri. Nobody asked what was in the oil. What Bliss had not told them, or claimed he did not know himself, was that some of that oil was not just used motor oil from service stations. Between February and October 1971, he had collected 6 truckloads, roughly 18,500 gallons, of chemical waste from a facility near Verona, Missouri. That facility had been used to manufacture Agent Orange for the Vietnam War. The company running it at the time was called NEPACCO, the Northeastern Pharmaceutical and Chemical Company. Their process for making hexachlorophene, a common disinfectant, produced a toxic byproduct stored in a single insulated black tank on the premises. That byproduct was dioxin, specifically 2,3,7,8-tetrachlorobenzopyridioxin. The concentration in the tank ran to over 340 parts per million. For context, the Environmental Protection Agency considers soil dangerous at 1 part per billion. NEPACCO's tank contained waste at 340,000 times that level. NEPACCO contracted out the disposal to a company called Independent Petrochemical Corporation, IPC. IPC hired Bliss. Bliss mixed the waste with motor oil, drove it to Times Beach, and sprayed it on the streets. The first sign something was wrong did not come from Times Beach. It came from horses. At the Shenandoah stables in Verona, where Bliss had sprayed earlier, horses began losing weight, developing lesions, and dying. At least 62 registered quarter horses died or had to be destroyed. Birds fell dead from the rafters. Dogs and cats perished. A 6-year-old girl, the daughter of the stable owner, became severely ill and was hospitalized. The CDC investigated in 1979. When a former NEPACCO employee confessed that the waste contained dioxin, investigators began working backward through Bliss's route across Missouri. By 1982, the Environmental Protection Agency was testing soil at Times Beach. What they found was dioxin at 100 parts per billion, 100 times the level considered dangerous. On December 23, 1982, the day after the Merrimack River receded, the Environmental Protection Agency announced to the town's residents that their soil was contaminated. The Centers for Disease Control recommended permanent relocation for everyone. On February 22, 1983, the EPA announced a federal buyout under the Superfund program, formerly known as CERCLA, the Comprehensive Environmental Response, Compensation, and Liability Act. The government paid $33 million to purchase 800 residential properties and 30 businesses. Times Beach was added to the National Priorities List on September 8, 1983. By 1986, all 2,242 residents had left. Missouri Governor John Ashcroft formally disincorporated the town by executive order on April 2, 1985. The legal aftermath was long and largely unsatisfying. Over 14,000 citizens' suits were filed against NEPACCO, IPC, Syntex Agribusiness, and Bliss himself. Russell Bliss maintained throughout that he had no knowledge that dioxin was present in the waste. Because the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, which required hazardous waste disposal records, was not passed until 1976, Bliss was not legally required to keep records of what he had collected in 1971. He was convicted of filing false income tax returns, not of anything related to the contamination itself. He never went to prison for Times Beach. 2 NEPACCO executives were convicted under federal environmental statutes and received prison sentences. A third fled the country and died before serving time. Syntex Agribusiness, under a 1990 consent decree entered by District Judge John F. Nangle, was required to build and operate the incinerator at Times Beach, incinerate contaminated soil from 27 dioxin sites across eastern Missouri, and pay $10 million back into the Superfund. Total cleanup costs ran to $110 million. The incineration ran from 1996 to 1997 and processed 265,354 tons of contaminated soil and debris, 37,234 tons of it from Times Beach alone. Everything went in: the soil, the houses, the businesses, even the water tower. The remains were buried on site in what workers called the town mound. In October 1999, the state of Missouri opened Route 66 State Park on the land where Times Beach once stood. Visitors hike and cycle there today. The Bridgehead Inn, one of the only surviving structures, became the visitor center. The EPA removed Times Beach from the Superfund National Priorities list in 2001, declaring the land no longer a threat to public health. There is a detail that does not appear in the park signage. When the EPA began identifying dioxin-contaminated sites across Missouri in the early 1980s, they found not 1, not 5, but more than 100 locations across the state where Bliss had sprayed. Times Beach got the federal buyout and the headlines. The other sites, mostly horse farms and private roads, were handled quietly and separately over the following decade. Times Beach was the largest civilian dioxin exposure in American history at the time. It was also the event, alongside Love Canal in New York, that forced Congress to acknowledge what the Superfund law actually needed to do. Before Times Beach, the EPA had the legal authority but not the political pressure. After Times Beach, that changed. The town no longer exists, but the argument about whether it needed to go still has not fully settled. Some CDC officials years later said the evacuation may have been an overreaction, that the dioxin levels, while real, may not have posed the acute danger originally claimed. Former residents who spent years being shunned by neighboring towns out of fear of contagion were never offered a clear answer on what the exposure actually cost them. What is not in dispute is what happened to the 800 families of Times Beach, Missouri. They went to work one morning in the early 1970s with a dust problem. A man they trusted charged them 6 cents a gallon to solve it. And 11 years later, the government told them to walk away from everything they had built with no guarantee that walking away would be enough. The park is open every day. The address is Route 66. There is no sign that tells you what used to be there. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more abandonment documentaries from across America.